haku haku, kichich antik, kikikich, kakinaliu, thank you all for being here, all of the people, wherever you come from, wherever your people are, whatever your background. This is a very important, auspicious event, this gathering, today and tomorrow. We're so blessed to be able to talk and to discuss this very important issue. It matters very much to many, many indigenous people and non-indigenous alike, Catholic and non-Catholic alike. We would like to offer a prayer song. And I'd like to have my sister Georgiana speak to you about the song and what it is about and where it came from.
Creator gave this song to my eldest daughter, and we really love it. And when we were taking our mother's body from away from the house, it was early morning, and we sang it because it says, moke, moke. It's already, the sun is already arisen. It's time to pray, it's time to pray. And then you're asking Creator to please watch over all of us. Okay, it's a simple, beautiful song.
Moke, 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 salishao. Moke, 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 salishao. Skuta ki alasal, skuta ki alasal. Ya, 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 ya. Tani dilicious. Tani delicious. Moke, 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 salishao. Moke, 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 salishao. Skuta ki alasal, skuta ki alasal. Ya, 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 ya. Tani delicious. Tani delicious. Moke, 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 salishao. Moke, 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 salishao. Skuta ki alasal, skuta ki alasal. Ya, 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 ya. Tani delicious. Tani delicious.
Tani Kilikiu, please watch over us.
God, did your mic there?
I'm calling on all of our ancestors from all of the directions, asking for protection, asking for the good words that we need to articulate the ideas and the feelings and the meanings that are so important to us here, and asking that they will be peaceful words, peaceful thoughts, that they will bring us to healing and to resolution. I'm praying for the land, I'm praying for the ocean, I'm praying especially that the horrible thing that has happened here with the oil spill will be resolved and cleaned up, and that it will be a deep lesson to us to never let this happen again. I'm praying for all those creatures who have been so harmed, praying for the healing of the ocean in that place. We are praying for healing, for healing. Thank you, Creator, thank you.
Thank you so much. This is the cooperative effort of the Coastal Band of the Chumash Nation and the Barrio Chumash Council of Santa Barbara. It is amazing that we come together and have this stellar panel. As you can see, I will announce them. Before I do that, we put together a code of conduct for this panel presentation. In the spirit, we ask you to recognize and observe this code of conduct, which to many people, this is something of human nature and of just courtesy. But because this is a committee effort, and more than one person effort, we came to the conclusion that we needed to read it. Code of behavior. When at the mission, respect behavior to all present, as well as to the ancestors and others buried at the mission and nearby. No physical or verbal abuse or disruptions, including bullying, threats, or personal attacks of any kind. No alcohol, drugs, or weapons. No photos or videos without prior authorization. At the discretion of the event host, individuals violating this code may be escorted from the events. Now go on. The thank yous. I want to, first of all, call up the Reverend Julia up here for a second, up in the stage, and panelists, this is the Reverend that we talked to about using the facility we asked all about. And I want everyone to recognize the Reverend Julia. She is of the real essence of what Santa Barbara is to our general community. Her kindness and generosity is second to none. And you can see this is a grand facility. This is a facility that we want to show our appreciation and recognition and appreciation for the Unitarian Society of Santa Barbara. So thank you very much. Let's give a round of applause. And the other thank yous is, of course, the 7th Generation Fund for Indigenous Peoples, and we want to thank them for their contributions, for their effort and to make this a success. Also, La Casa de Raza in Santa Barbara, the Fund for Santa Barbara, and also the other organizations like Boled of Santa Barbara that is going to have a lunch today, and also other individuals, and we'll announce them as time goes on because we don't have too much time. We live in a very special time. Each one of us, as the panelists, they're experts in their own field, culturally, historically. We wanted to set up these panels in order to do two things. One, to look at history from our point of view, from an Indigenous point of view. And second, to give the Christian and Catholic community that's against canonization a voice to the world, a voice to the community, a voice to our own hearts. And we said, the organizers said, and they wanted me to repeat this, this is not a Christian bashing or Catholic bashing event, because many of you in the audience are Catholic, and we respect that. And many are not, and we respect that. So, as you know, I can go on for many, many minutes. I have a radio show, American Indian Airways, Coyote Radio, KPFK, low plug. I want to first read the panelists, and then they will speak for themselves. Elias Castillo, author, A Cross of Thorns, which we will have a book signing at noon. Tia Otis Peters Zuni, Executive Director of the 7th Generation Fund for Indigenous Peoples. Dina Dart Newton, Chumash, PhD, Anthropology. And I want to say PhD because she worked damn hard for that. And we're really proud of her. Shannon Rivers, Akumen, Oman, and I always say that incorrectly. I apologize to the world, to the universe for that. Shannon, don't beat me up. Former chair of the Global Indigenous Peoples Caucus of the United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues. Roberto Cordero, Chumash elder, close to band of the Chumash Nation. Fufulipi Tonga, PhD, candidate, Department of Ethics Studies, UC Berkeley. And I apologize, I cannot, for the life of me, say your last name, and hopefully you can clear that air up also. This is panel 2 at 1 o'clock. The first panel, is International Ramification of Canonization. The second panel is Catholic and Christian Against Canonization. Valentin Lopez, chairman of the Mutsun tribal band of Cosanolan Ohlone Indians. Georgiana Bolis Sanchez, Chumash Otham, elder, Bogland Chumash Council. Retired American Indian Studies, California State University, Long Beach, professor. To me, she's a PhD. Donna Scribner, cross-cultural psychiatry, historical trauma focus. Mary Valdemar, co-founder of Chica, San Bernardino, California. Greg Cotton, Christian research scientist and human rights advocate. And last but not least, Sasheen Littlefeather, Apache Yaqui, Native American elder and activist, and a sweetheart for all our community. Let's give all of them a round of applause. Also, we have a video crew out there, and an audio crew, Gary Atkins. I want to thank him from the bottom of our heart for helping us in the audio and video. I want to also thank the Sacred Place Institute of Indigenous Peoples, and they're doing a documentary film crew, Living in the Shadows of Serra. Nono Bob Becker, Ben Kennedy, Angela Marcy D'Arcy, Jonathan Kinney, Victoria Jamel, Charles Worth, JJ Charles Worth. So thank you very much. Give it a hand of applause. And also Larry Smith from the American Indian Heritage Priority Radio. And if I miss some individuals, please forgive me. And of course, the Bogland Chumash Council and the Coastal Band, the Chumash Nation, the volunteers and the members of their organizations, as well as the American Indian Movement, Southern California. The way this is going to work is this. We're going to have 15-minute discussion per panelist. After they're done, then we're going to have questions and answers, and the mics will be given to you, or you will be asked to step forward and speak into the mic with your questions. And if you have a statement, we encourage, we beg, we plead that you keep it short. There's a lot of people in the aisle here, and it's wonderful that you all showed up and you care about this issue. And our first presenter is Valentin Lopez, chairman of the Mutsun tribal band of Cosanolan Ohlone Indians. Round of applause.
Okay. Good morning. I want to first give prayers and blessings to all those, to the ancestors who were taken to the mission here in Santa Barbara, and I want to give prayers and blessings to the descendants and current members. So prayers and blessings to all. My name is Valentin Lopez, and I'm the chairman of the Ama Mutsun Tribal Band. Our tribe is comprised of those that were taken to mission San Juan Bautista and Mission Santa Cruz. The missions were a brutal place. Growing up, we heard a lot of stories about the brutality that occurred at the missions. We heard of mothers cupping their hands over the children at birth, newborns, cupping their hands over the mouth of a newborn to suffocate it so that infant would not be raised at the missions. We heard of a priest getting sugar brought to him for the first time, and he had a bowl of sugar in his room, and natives were coming up and tasting the sugar and licking it. They had never tasted sugar before. And they told others of it, and they tasted it and licked it. The priest recognized that someone was stealing his sugar, and he put poison in that sugar bowl. And 7 Indians died as a result of that. We heard stories of other missions as well. We heard a story that at Mission Ventura, that the Indians were being whipped. They were just being, just being whipped on a daily basis and for no reason at all. And one day, the Indians, rather than be whipped, they ran into the church and begged with the priest that they not be whipped, to please, have the whippings stop. The priest went outside and told the soldiers, get them out of there. The soldiers went in and killed the Indians. I'm not sure how many there were. Killed the Indians and carried the bodies out. These are the stories of the violence. And we heard many, many, many other stories that have been passed down. And so, at Mission San Juan Bautista, for example, again, 19,421 Indians died. And that was reported in 1923. The missions went on for another 10 years. And we don't know how many died during that period of time. When you count the deaths at the missions, a lot of Indians would, when the disease came to the missions, they would run away. And they would run to other tribes. And they would bring the disease to those tribes. And those tribes, many members or all those members would die as well. And those deaths are never counted in the death count of the missions. At Mission San Juan Bautista, they were bringing in a tribe, the Oristimba tribe from the town of Newman. They rounded them up and were bringing them to the mission. And whenever they got to the peak of the mountain and about to descend and go into the missions, it was the women and children only that would come. They knew that the husbands would follow later. They always targeted the women for capture. And at the summit, the women sat down and the children sat down. And they refused to go any further. And they were being whipped by the soldiers to get them to go, dragged, pushed, coerced, threatened with their children and everything else, but yet they refused to go. And after a number of days, the commander said, kill them all and spread their remains. On that day, over 200 women and children were slaughtered, hacked to death. And the remains were spread over an area, over a wide area. Many of those remains are still there on that mountaintop today. That's private property. We tried to go there so that we can rebury these ancestors, the remains of these ancestors, and the property owner will not let us go onto that property. But 200 died there. We're aware of other similar massacres elsewhere. But the point is that those deaths are never counted in the mission records. We believe that it's a conservative estimate that the missions killed over 100,000 Indians during the time of the mission. The church also, now what's happening now is the church admits that there was violence and that the missions were not good places, but somehow they're trying to separate Father Serra from the actions of the missions, as if though he was the one beaming light of goodness in the mission system that had gone bad. But how can that be? Elias Castillo is going to talk a little bit, and he'll tell you in Serra's own words of the brutality and his feelings and his thoughts about how he felt about the Indians. But he did order the whipping of Indians. He did order that they be put in shackles or tied in stocks. And he did it for extended periods of time. For 30, for one time, for 1 month, that there were to be daily whippings and to be put into shackles for 30 days. That's absolute torture. But yet, they want to separate Serra as being the good guy, the one who was right in all of that. It was Serra who was just following the directives of the papal bulls. The papal bulls, and these are important, the papal bulls are a much bigger issue than Junipero Serra. And should Serra become canonized or not, our voice will not stop. We need to continue all working together to get those papal bulls rescinded. But the papal bulls were issued by the Pope in the late 1400s, or the middle to late 1400s and early 1500s. And the papal bull said in essence that all non-Christian people, particularly indigenous people, that we were savages, that we were pagans, that we were heathens, that we had no soul, and that it was okay for them to come on in and to steal our land. It was okay for them to brutalize us, to kill us, to murder us, to rape the women. That was okay because we had no soul, so we didn't matter to the heavens. Those papal bulls also said that we were the enemies of Christ. Those papal bulls supposedly were given to the popes, because there was more than one pope that issued those papal bulls. Those papal bulls were supposedly given to them by God. And those are directives from God. And so Junipero Serra, when he came here, he felt that he was doing God's work by the way he treated the Indians, by the way he stole their land, by the way he enslaved them at the missions. They were not allowed to leave. When they left, they would send the soldiers to track them down, hunt them, and drag them back. We have one of the stories I heard is that one of our ancestors ran away and they sent the soldiers out to capture him, and then they lasted him and they dragged him back. They dragged him back for miles. When he got home, when he got back to the mission, he was barely alive and he did die. But that's the way they would bring the runaways back to the missions. The missions were just the start of it all. The missions, as I said, were brutal. But then our tribe does a lot with healing, and we'll talk about that more this afternoon. But I want to quickly go over that. How could our people, how could the parents teach their children who were separated from him? Because at the missions, they separated the children from the mothers and from the fathers. And they had the men in one room, the women in another room, and the children in another room. And they were separated, and they were not allowed to intermingle. So how could the parents teach their children love? How could they teach them respect? How could they give them a good identity? How could they teach them optimism and hope, and etc.? That went on for several generations. Then we had the Mexican period and the Mexican period. And there again, I mean, there's no hope to be passed on. There's no love to be passed on. There's no indigenous knowledge that was lost that could be passed on so that children could find balance in their life, so that they knew what their responsibilities were to Creator. That's what the missions gave to us. when Junipero Serra, when and if Junipero Serra is officially canonized to Yamamutin, that means that the Catholic Church and that Pope Francis agree with the papal bulls. That means that the papal bulls were correct, that we were heathens, we were pagans, we were savages, that we had no soul. So it didn't matter how brutal they were, it didn't matter how many of us died, it didn't matter how many of us were put into shackles. It was the right thing to do for the Catholic Church. They achieved their objective. And for that, Junipero Serra is being canonized for following through with the papal bulls. We have a tribal psychiatrist. She'll be talking later this afternoon also. Her name is Dr. Donna Schindler. She's been working with our tribe for over 2 years. But for 4 years now, our tribe has had wellness meetings, ongoing wellness meetings. And our wellness meetings, we talk about our history, we talk about our culture, we talk about how do we, about restoring, how do we restore our language, and we work on those things. We also talk about how can we improve the identity of our youth so that our youth can grow up with pride and optimism and love and understand who they are and what their responsibility is to Creator. We work on those things. But when the Pope canonizes Junipero Serra, Donna has said, when we heard that, Donna said, she goes, well, that's job security for all therapists working in historic trauma. It's another 100 to 200 years of job security for us, because that's just going to add just a tremendous weight to the historic trauma that we already carry. We're working, we recently sent a letter. Well, as you know, that we spoke, many of you know, I spoke at the United Nations. But prior to speaking on this issue, both the papal bulls and Junipero Serra, the day prior to speaking at the United Nations, we met with the representative, the Vatican's representative to the United Nations, Monsignor Gretsch. And we told him of our concerns with the canonization of Junipero Serra. And we told him a lot about the conditions and the truths about the missions, and we gave him a copy of the book, A Cross of Thorns. And whenever we were talking to him, he said that he had no idea of any of what we were saying about the conditions of the missions. Because he had always heard that it was just a wonderful, beautiful place where the Indians came in voluntarily, where they were treated like children and they were treated with love and respect. That is the point of view that the Catholic Church espouses now, but it is not the true conditions that were there. We also asked Monsignor Gretsch we also told him that we'd like to have a meeting with Pope Francis at the Vatican as soon as possible, in advance of him coming to the United States for the canonization, so we could talk to him about the missions. And he asked us to send him a letter. He asked us to send him a letter with our request for a meeting. And so we developed a letter. When I say we, the delegation that met with the Monsignor was our tribal historian, Dr. Christine Grabowski, Orrin Lyons, who's a faith keeper with the Odumoshoni, and also Anthony Gonzalez, who's the director of AIM West. Well, we sent the letter to the Pope, and in that letter we said, when you speak, people see that you speak with, assume or believe that you speak with moral authority. But how can you speak with moral authority when you support the actions of Junipero Serra, but his actions were so immoral. We haven't heard from the Pope yet regarding that meeting. We hope we do. We'll go immediately whenever, I mean, he sets the date and time and we'll be there to meet with him. But we haven't met with him yet. But it's important that we do that because we want to make sure that should he canonize Junipero Serra, that he knows the truth. And then he still canonizes Junipero Serra. We don't want to allow him to make the claim later that he had no idea of the conditions of the mission. And if he had known, he would not have done that. We're not going to give him that escape. We're not going to allow him to ignore the truth, to sweep things under the carpet, to pretend things didn't happen. We want to make sure that he's doing this with his eyes wide open and to realize that the moral authority to canonize Junipero Serra is not there. And if he wants to regain the moral authority of the Catholic Church, what has been lost by a lot of their actions over the years and centuries, that he will need to not canonize Junipero Serra and will need to rescind the papal bulls. Thank you.
As we are in front of this panel, you can see that it was grouped between male and female. And that's like a tumult or like our vessels. It's a strength of the left side and right side of our hearts and within our muscles, with that balance between the femininity and the masculinity. So it's no accident. The next speaker is Elias Castillo, author of The Cross of Thorns. Let's give him a round of applause. And just one note, please turn off all your cell phones. And you mothers and fathers, you're doing a terrific job with the children. Thank you so much.
I think I'd like to open with how did the mission myth, M-Y-T-H, start? Oh, okay, that better? How did the mission myth start? How did this fairy tale begin? Well, it began in about between 1870 and 1880. And what happened in California, there was a woman author named Helen Hunt Jackson. She had read Uncle Tom's Cabin and thought, boy, there's a lot of parallel between what happened between the slaves and what is happening to the California Indians, who were being treated horribly, even in 1870, 1880. So she proceeded to write a book called Ramona. And in Pasadena, there is, or Pomona, I can't remember which city it is, but they annually put on a pageant of a play based on her book. She did a good job of describing the mistreatment of the Indians. And the tremendous discrimination they were suffering, even in the 1880s, 1890s. But in their book, there is one passage in which the story is about a couple. She is Mexican, he is Indian. And it tells about the terrible discrimination that they faced. And they go to a mission. There were a few missions that had not fallen apart. And in this one mission, she describes it as just a wonderful Garden of Eden, where the friar there was so kind and so forth, and really provided them with comforting words. Well, that's what stuck in people's mind. That's the only part of the book that stuck in people's mind. Not the discrimination, not the beatings, not the racism that was aimed against but that part. And California developers at that time wanted more people to come to California. So they glommed onto that, just really, boy, this is what we need. this is going to attract people to California. We've got to publicize the wonders of the missions, and just, they did with their land developers. They come to California, visit the missions and the wonderful friars who developed this land. And they did that. People did come. And then they targeted the big four, which were the multimillionaires who had developed California by building railroads. And they were, I can't name all of them, but they were Crocker, Stanford, and Huntington, and if anyone knows the fourth one, Hopkins. And they went to them and they said, look, this woman has written a book about how wonderful California is. These big four knew nothing about the real truth, which a publisher named Bancroft had published about 1870 in a series of volumes called History of California, which he had sent anthropologists, sociologists of that time to Alaska, Oregon, and California, Mexico, and Spain to find documents written by the missionaries, the Franciscan friars, and they did. They found hordes of them, and they all pointed to the same theme. The Indians were horribly mistreated in the missions by the friars. And those records can be found at Bancroft Library, at the Santa Barbara Mission Historical Archives, in books at Stanford, San Jose State University, and the documents themselves can be also found, a lot of them, at the National Archives of Mexico in Mexico City, which is, I went to all of those, bouncing back and forth, looking for those documents. And that is how the mission myth started. It wasn't, oh gee, I remember when it was so wonderful. People were talking about that. It was the fact that it was just myth made up. It was a myth. It actually is a myth. And Bancroft discovered that it was a myth, that there was no truth to it at all. And he ordered his guys, the scientists that he sent out, to bring those documents, preserve them, buy them, whatever you have, but bring them through. And if you go to University of California at Berkeley and go to the Bancroft Library, you have access to those documents, which I looked through, and also at the Santa Barbara Mission Archives and National Archives of Mexico. And what they showed is a brutal repression in the Franciscans' own writing. The punishment records, they were, I'll say it, they were said like the Gestapo. They kept records on everything, and those records are still preserved today. Anyone can look at them. I did. I spent hours going through them. They also have at Bancroft and at Stanford books called the Writings of Junipero Serra, the Writings of Laswan, and the Writings of Mariano Palleras. And what those books tell is that in their letters, they themselves say, as Junipero did in one letter, it said, when you have the governor of California, by the way, the governors of California were totally opposed to the missions. They wanted the Indians, as King Carlos III had ordered, that the Indians be placed or be educated for 10 years, and then afterwards be released, and they would become full-fledged Spanish citizens. And that's what the king ordered. Serra decided, no, he's not going to do that. And then you ask, well, why didn't he do it? Well, because California was thousands and thousands of miles from Spain. It was very difficult to communicate. And the friars certainly were not going to go against their own leader. And the governors were afraid if they criticized them formally, which they wanted to do, but they were afraid of the Inquisition. And something like that they might wind up before the Inquisition, which would, as most of you know, what the Inquisition was, La Santísima Inquisición. They would probably be tortured or killed by the Catholic Inquisition. So they couldn't do very much except argue with the Indians. And in one time, one of them asked Serra, "Why do you treat the Indians as so cruelly?" And Serra answered, somewhat cavalierly in a long letter, "Well, this is the way we've always done it. When Saint Solano in South America established his missions down there, he would, if the Indians did not obey him, he would whip them. So there's nothing wrong with it. We've been doing this since the 16th century." And he said, when you have a civilization so backwards, so uncivilized, so savage as this in California, the only way to treat them is by blows. That's exact words in this letter, which I read aghast. And then I began finding others, in which he said, he did not care about the lives and the well-being of Indians in this earth. He only cared if they were baptized, and then if they died, well, so what? They're going to heaven. So I can write that down in my book that I already sent all these souls to heaven. And he was fond of saying, "Thanks be to God, now that all of the missions have sons in heaven." He was thanking God for the deaths of Indians. But far worse than that was another letter I found. And it's near this section, it's in the end. And it's a letter to his superior in Mexico City. And he states, "Well, here at the missions, we're all having our little troubles, but at Mission, I think it was Mission Padua, we're having two harvests. One is of the grain that is filling our bushels, and the other is other children who are dying of a plague." And I was dumbfounded that someone like him would equate the deaths of children as a harvest. But that's how he looked at the Indians. He also will say, well, he was very kind to the Indians. He never whipped them. And that is not true. I found a letter to the governor, and he has sent 3 or 4 Indians to the governor for punishment. And he writes in this letter, "Oh, those Indians I sent you, those troublemakers," I'm paraphrasing a little bit here, whip them 3 or 4 times over a month, and let this serve as a lesson to them and to the others. And here's the kicker. If you do not have shackles, we have some here, and with your permission, I will send them to you. What is Junipero Serra doing with shackles if he is so kind? And these were brutal machines. In one case, one of the shackle designs, you would have an iron band bolted or locked around your waist, and emanated from that would be these iron strips down your leg, down to your ankles. And you couldn't bend your knees. They had to do field work in those things. And you can imagine what the hygiene was. If they couldn't bend their knees, you can imagine. And not only did visitors to the missions describe these monstrous machines that the friars had made with the help of each mission had a blacksmith. And they were whipped. The records, for example, if you look at the records of punishment for the Indians, you'll see, and all of the Indians, once they were baptized, they didn't, and by baptized, they didn't know what they were saying. The friar would get them and says, okay, make this sound, Ave Maria. And they say, Indians would say, perfectly, Ave Maria. But they didn't know what it meant. Or Padre Nuestro que estás en el cielo. They just mouthed them. had no idea of what they were saying. Once they could say the whole prayers, then they would baptize them. They couldn't understand it. What they did understand was that if they tried to leave, they would be stopped by soldiers holding rifles with bayonets on them. And the alcaldes, the bully boys. The bully boys were Indians themselves, and they had been handpicked by the friars to beat the Indians. And they were like the capos in Auschwitz. So you had basically, well, not basically, you had missions, all of them were death camps. The Indians died within 2 years of entering the missions. Now, did the Franciscans ever admit that they had death camps? They did. In 1820, Mariano Palleras, the last Spanish president of the missions, wrote a letter to his superior in Mexico City, and I'm paraphrasing, but it follows pretty well, in which he said, we need an alibi to explain why the heathens here have disappeared. He says, you can ask any friar, and they will gladly answer. All we have done for them is consecrate them, baptize them, and bury them. Consecrate them, baptize them, and bury them. This is from the Padre Presidente, a Franciscan. Yeah. And what he went on to say was that we did as we were told. Now, where have you heard that before? Where have you heard that before? We did as we were told. And we have wiped out all of the Indians on the coast. There are no more gentile Indians who are outside of the mission. There are no gentile Indians outside of the missions. We have killed them all. And that is in the letter, which is, if you look in the book, if you read my book, it'll tell you where that letter is, the exact page of where that letter is, and these letters that are mentioned. They're all very carefully footnoted, which I knew would be disbelievers. Well, fine, you don't believe this? Go to this book. Writings of Lasuan, writings of Serra were all published by the Academy of American Franciscan History. They were published by the Franciscans themselves. And I've got to admire who collected, the people who collected did not censor the letters. They're in there, warts and all. So there is the proof. And it's shocking. Absolutely shocking. Let me read you something about Lasuan. Give me a few seconds to find it. Got to change glasses. Thank you. All right. Let's see here. So here. One more. Be patient. Oh, here it is. Lasuan, Francisco Fermin Lasuan, was Serra's successor. When Serra died in 1864, Lasuan took over as Padre Presidente. And Lasuan, this is on page 93, Lasuan, as president of the Franciscan, was a guiding force in establishing the remaining 11 missions. Lasuan had little regard for California's Indians, whom he considered akin to lower animals, and who he believed lived only for the present. They satiate themselves, this is a quote from the letter that is in the writings of Lasuan, published by the Franciscans. They satiate themselves today and give little thought to tomorrow. He wrote, adding that California's Indians are a people without education, without government, religion, or respect for authority, and they shamelessly pursue, without restraint, whatever their brutal appetites suggest to them. His low opinion of them never wavered during his life in California. The new Padre Presidente continued Serra's policy that corporal punishment was the only way to control the mission Indians. So that's how it was from 1769 to 1821, when the missions came under Mexican rule. And then for 12 more years, the Mexicans felt the missions were so important to California's economy that they had to let the Indians and the missions continue as they were. They didn't improve it. Not until 1833, when Governor Echeandía came to California, and then the Indians begged him, told him they were suffering, and he said, okay, I will free you. And he did. He said, from now on, the missions are now secularized. They will become parish churches, and closed them down. The Indians, after almost 60 years of Catholicism and being brutalized, fled the missions almost overnight and went and returned. Who returned, they thought, to their lands. But those lands had been taken already. They had nowhere to go. Their language, their beliefs, so many elders had died in the missions that their history was very weak. And now Pope Francis wants to eliminate that. And I have one question for Pope regarding Pope Francis in this case. Oh, and then one thing. In 1940, between 1940 and 1950, there was an attempt to canonize Serra, but it never came about because of the protest by the Indians. They just said, okay, we're not going to do it. So they went, and that never came about. So the history of the mission is nothing but blood, shed, cruelty towards the Indians, almost on a daily basis. You just have to look at the punishment record. And I'll finish right now, and look and read those. Juan Sanchez, 24 lashes. The reason? He asked for more food. And with that, I'll end.
The next person is our beloved Dina Dark Newton Chumash, PhD candidate. Excuse me, PhD anthropology. She's done that already. Excuse me. You're on.
Thanks.
And make sure that mic's low.
Good morning.
I'll make it.
Can you hear me? Good morning. What a way to start us off, you two. Those are a couple of tough acts to follow. I'd first just like to say how grateful I am that I'm able to be here and to say hello to all of my relatives. Looking out at your faces gives me a lot of strength and a lot of hope, and it tickles me that Pilula is here, and I'm just stunned and amazed at the resilience of this community, given the truths that we've just witnessed, that we continue to suit up and show up as Indian people and assert our identity and our right to be Indigenous people on these lands. I'm surprised at my own resilience, to tell you the truth. I wasn't going to come because I've just recently lost my father, and my mother's very ill. And as a result these personal crises, I feel rather shaky inside. And Marcus, I called Marcus and Kareem to tell them that I wasn't going to be able to come. And Marcus reminded me that I was going to be in a room full of my relatives. And that this was a prayerful event, and about honoring the ancestors and the memory of the people who have gone before us. So thank you for that reminder, and thank you for your presence here, because it gives me strength where strength is absent currently. Thanks also to Marcus for mentioning the hard work of my PhD. It was a long road, 10 years, and $150,000 in student loan debt. And all of my work has been about trying to raise awareness about the way, not necessarily that we were impacted by history. I recognize that, and